The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the darkness between stars. Its lights twinkled like jewels against the black space. Inside the station, hundreds of alien beings moved through the corridors. Today was special. Today, Earth would send its first diplomat to join the Galactic Council. Ambassador Dae-Hyun Park straightened his formal blue suit as he looked out the window of his small ship. He had spent months learning about the different alien races. The Council had 43 member species, each one different from humans. Some looked like giant insects. Others were made of living crystal. A few even lived underwater and wore special suits to breathe. "Sir, we're almost there," said Captain So-Young Kim from the pilot's seat. She was nervous. Her hands gripped the controls tightly. Behind them, the Earthship Harmony followed at a safe distance. It was painted white with blue stripes, showing Earth's peaceful intentions. Park smiled at the captain. "Don't worry, So-Young. This is what we trained for. Humanity is ready to join the galaxy as friends." The Harmony was not a warship. It had no weapons, just communication equipment and gifts from Earth. Park carried samples of human art, music, and food. He wanted to show the aliens that humans were a peaceful people who loved beauty and culture. As they docked with Nexus Prime, Park felt excited. First contact with aliens had happened 50 years ago. Since then, Earth had stayed quiet, learning and growing. Now they were ready to take their place among the stars. The docking bay was huge. Park had never seen anything so big. Alien ships of every shape and size filled the space. Some looked like metal flowers. Others were perfect spheres that glowed with inner light. A few were so strange that Park couldn't figure out which end was the front. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," said a voice through the ship's speakers. The translator made it sound human, but Park knew the being speaking was probably nothing like a human. Park stepped out of his ship with his small team. The air smelled different here, like metal and ozone with a hint of something sweet. Gravity was lighter than Earth's, making him feel like he could jump higher. A group of aliens waited for them. The leader was tall and thin with blue skin and 4 arms. Its name was Council Speaker Veltar. It had been the first alien to welcome Earth into the galactic community. "Ambassador Park," Veltar said, its voice musical. "We are honored by your presence. Earth has shown great wisdom in seeking membership." Park bowed as he had practiced. "The honor is ours, Speaker Veltar. Earth comes in peace and friendship." They walked through corridors filled with wonders. Holographic displays showed news from across the galaxy. Gardens grew plants that glowed and moved like they were dancing. Water flowed upward in impossible spirals. But Park noticed something else. Not all the aliens looked happy to see him. Some stared with what looked like anger or fear. A group of reptilian beings with sharp teeth watched him pass. Their eyes were cold and hostile. "Those are the Vextar," whispered Dr. Min-Ho Lee, Park's science advisor. "They lead something called the Hegemony Coalition. Our reports say they don't like new members joining the Council. The Vextar Empire controlled 12 star systems. They believed that only the strongest species should rule the galaxy. They had fought wars against weaker races and won every time. The idea that soft humans from a single world might have the same voting power as their mighty empire made them angry. The council chamber was even bigger than the docking bay. It was shaped like a bowl with seats rising up in circles. Each species had their own section designed for their needs. The aquatic races sat in water-filled tanks. The crystal beings rested on beds of sand that sparkled with energy. Park took his place at the center of the chamber. A spotlight shone down on him, making him feel very small. Thousands of alien eyes watched him from above. Some were kind and curious. Others were cold and judging. "Members of the Galactic Council," Park began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's speakers. "I am Dae-Hyun Park, speaking for all of humanity. We come to you not as conquerors or beggars, but as neighbors seeking friendship." He talked about Earth's history. He admitted that humans had fought many wars, but said they had learned from their mistakes. He spoke of human art, science, and dreams of exploring the stars in peace. "We offer our knowledge freely," Park said. "Our music to bring joy. Our stories to share wisdom. Our hands to help build a better galaxy for all." Many aliens seemed moved by his words. The plant-like Silari swayed in what Park hoped was approval. The insect collective clicked their mandibles in rhythm, which their translator said meant respect. But in the Vextar section, War Prince Krexnor stood up. He was huge, even for his species, with scales that looked like black armor and eyes like burning coals. "Pretty words from a soft species," Krexnor said, his voice like grinding stone. But words are wind. What can humans offer that we do not already have? You have one small world. We have empires. Park stayed calm. He had expected this challenge. Your Highness speaks truth. We have one world, but that world has produced wonders. We have survived ice ages and plagues. We have turned deserts into gardens and reached for the stars with nothing but our will to explore. Survival means nothing if you cannot defend what you build. Krexnor replied. The galaxy belongs to the strong. The weak serve or die. Many aliens looked uncomfortable at these harsh words. The council was supposed to be about cooperation, not conquest. Park stepped forward, extending his hand toward the Vextar prince. It was an old human gesture of friendship. Then let us show you that there is strength in unity, Your Highness. Earth offers not just our knowledge, but our loyalty to this council and all who seek peace. The chamber fell silent. This was the moment that would decide humanity's future. Park's hand remained extended, waiting. Krexnor looked at the offered hand with disgust. Humans think they can buy friendship with soft words and weaker gestures. What happened next took only seconds, but it felt like hours to Park. A figure moved in the shadows behind Krexnor. It was another Vextar, smaller and faster. In its claws was a weapon that hummed with deadly energy. The assassin struck before anyone could react. A beam of pure energy hit Park in the chest. The molecular disruptor tore through his body, destroying him at the cellular level. Ambassador Daehyun Park, Earth's first diplomat to the stars, died instantly. Chaos erupted in the chamber. Aliens screamed in languages Park's translator could no longer hear. Security forces rushed toward the Vextar section, but the assassin had already disappeared into the panicking crowd. Captain Kim's voice crackled over Park's communication device, which had fallen to the floor. Sir, what's happening? We're reading weapons fire. Krexnor stood over Park's body and spoke loudly enough for all to hear. A regrettable accident. One of our young warriors became excited. We will investigate this unfortunate incident. But his eyes showed no regret. They showed satisfaction. The other council members stared in horror. Speaker Veltar knelt beside Park's body, its four hands shaking. This cannot be. We are sworn to peace in these chambers. Accidents happen, Krexnor said with a cold smile. Perhaps humans are too fragile for galactic politics. Light years away, Admiral Tae-Min Lee stood in his command center on Luna Base, Earth's moon. He was old now, with gray hair and scars from humanity's last great war. The message from Nexus Prime had just arrived. Lee read the report 3 times before he believed it. Ambassador Park was dead, murdered by aliens who claimed it was an accident. The young man who had carried humanity's hopes to the stars was gone. Lee looked out at Earth through the command center's windows. The blue and green world looked so peaceful from here. Most humans were sleeping, dreaming of a bright future among the stars. They didn't know yet that their diplomat was dead. They didn't know that their dreams of peaceful contact had died with him. But Admiral Lee knew something the aliens didn't. He knew what humans were like when their peaceful offers were met with violence. He knew what happened when someone killed a human who came in friendship. Lee opened a secure communication channel to Earth's president. His voice was steady, but his eyes were hard as winter steel. Mr. President, he said, it's time to activate Protocol Omega. In the depths of space, hidden shipyards that had been dark for 50 years began to glow with new purpose. Humanity's true fleet was awakening. The news of Ambassador Park's death spread across Earth like wildfire. In Seoul, his family wept as they watched the footage from Nexus Prime. In New York, the president called an emergency session of the World Council. In London, children who had dreamed of meeting friendly aliens now had nightmares about monsters with sharp teeth. But the real change happened in places most humans had never heard of. Deep in the asteroid belt, mining stations that had been quiet for decades suddenly came alive. Lights flickered on in sections that had been sealed since the end of Earth's last war. Automated systems began moving, following orders that had been programmed 50 years ago and never used. Colonel Jin Woo Choi stood in the command center of Ceres Station, watching displays that showed ship after ship powering up. He was tall and serious with kind eyes that had seen too much war. His uniform was black with silver stars, the colors of Earth's real military. How many ships are ready, Colonel? Asked his aide. Lieutenant Yunishin Jinwoo checked his display. 300 so far. By tomorrow we'll have 1,000. By next week, he paused, looking at numbers that would have scared him if they weren't on his side. By next week, we'll have the largest fleet in human history. The ships weren't like the Harmony. These were warships built in secret during the 50 years since first contact. Earth's leaders had hoped they would never be needed. They had dreamed of a peaceful galaxy where such weapons were just bad memories. They had been wrong. Dr. Hye Jin-yoon worked without sleep in her laboratory on Luna Base. Around her, holographic displays showed everything humanity had learned about the Vextar Empire. She was small and quiet, but her mind was sharp as a laser. For 20 years she had studied alien biology, hoping to find ways to help them. Now she looked for ways to stop them. Their scales are tough, but not perfect, she told Admiral Lee over the communication link. Certain frequencies can make them brittle, and their hearing is very sensitive. Loud sounds can cause them real pain. Lee nodded grimly. What about their psychology? How do they think? They respect strength and despise weakness, Hyejin replied. They've been the biggest predators on their world for millions of years. They think that makes them natural rulers. She paused, looking at data that made her stomach turn. Admiral, they've done this before. The hegemony has wiped out 12 species in the last 1,000 years. Races that were too weak to fight back. But never one that could fight back properly, Lee said quietly. The Galactic Council was in chaos. Species that had been allies for centuries now looked at each other with suspicion. If the Vextar could murder a diplomat in the council chamber, what else might they do? Mediator Thrixol of the Zephyr Collective was one of the few aliens trying to fix the situation. Its people were peaceful, with soft blue fur and large eyes that showed emotions clearly. It had worked for decades to keep peace in the galaxy. Now it stood in a transport ship heading toward Earth's solar system, carrying a message of apology and hope for peace. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of human space. What Thrixol saw there made its fur stand on end with fear. Hundreds of human ships floated in perfect formation. They were huge, bigger than anything the Zephyr had ever built. Their hulls were dark metal that seemed to drink in light, weapons that looked powerful enough to crack planets pointed outward, ready for anything that might threaten Earth. "This is Admiral Lee of Earth Defense Command," came a voice over the radio. "State your business in human space." "I am Mediator Thrixol," it replied, trying to keep its voice steady. "I come seeking peace between our peoples." There was a long pause. "Then you may approach Earth, but know that you do so as our guest, not our equal. Those days ended when your Galactic Council let our diplomat die." Thrixol's ship was escorted to Earth by 6 human warships. Each one was easily 10 times larger than the Zephyr vessel. As they flew past Luna Base, Thrixol could see massive construction yards building even more ships. The humans had been busy. On Earth, President Kyung-Soo Nam waited in the ruins of Geneva. The old city had been destroyed in humanity's last great war centuries ago. It was now a memorial to what happened when humans fought each other. He had chosen to meet the alien here on purpose. Thrixol stepped out of its shuttle and looked around at the broken buildings and twisted metal. Flowers grew through the cracks in the concrete, and trees had grown tall between the ruins. It was beautiful in a sad way, but also frightening. This was what humans did to their own cities when they were angry. "Welcome to Earth, Mediator," President Nam said. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. "I hope you find your visit educational." "President Nam," Thrixol said carefully, "I come with deep regret for what happened to Ambassador Park. The Zephyr Collective condemns the Vextar actions completely. And yet he's still dead," Nam replied. "And the Galactic Council still calls it an accident." They walked through the ruins as they talked. Thrixol noticed that human children played in the memorial parks, laughing and running. Life continued even in places marked by death. "Your species shows promise," Thrixol said desperately. "Don't let grief drive you to darkness. War will only bring more death." President Nam stopped walking and turned to face the alien. His expression was calm, but his eyes were hard. "Mediator, I think you misunderstand our intentions. This isn't about grief. This is about justice. Justice can be achieved through law and courts," Thrixol said. The council had Ambassador Park murdered in its own chambers," Nam interrupted. "Your justice is worth nothing to us now. Then what do you want?" Nam was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the ruins of Geneva stood as silent witnesses to human anger. "We want the beings who killed our diplomat. We want the Vextar Empire to understand that there are consequences for their actions. And we want every species in the galaxy to know what happens when someone murders a human who comes in peace. You're talking about war, Thrixol whispered. We're talking about teaching a lesson, Nam corrected. Humanity has spent 10,000 years learning about justice, Mediator. We've made many mistakes, but we've learned from all of them. We know the difference between punishment and revenge, between justice and murder. As they spoke, a shuttle landed nearby. Out stepped a man who looked like a younger version of Ambassador Park. He wore the black uniform of Earth's military, with insignia that marked him as a high-ranking officer. Mediator Thrixol, President Nam said, meet Commander Sang-Ho Park, the ambassador's younger brother. Sang-Ho Park was different from his brother in many ways. Where Dae-hyun had been soft-spoken and gentle, Sang-Ho was hard and focused. Cybernetic implants enhanced his reflexes and thinking speed. His eyes held the cold calculation of a professional soldier. Commander Park leads our Special Operations Division, Nam explained. He and his soldiers have trained their whole lives for a war we hoped would never come. Sang-Ho bowed politely to the alien, but his respect was formal and distant. My brother believed in peace, Mediator. He died for that belief. Now I fight so that his death will have meaning. Thrixol looked between the two humans, beginning to understand the terrible situation. You're not going to negotiate, are you? We tried negotiating, Nam said simply. We sent our best diplomat with our finest hopes. They killed him and called it an accident. There's nothing left to negotiate. That night, Thrixol was given quarters in a human building. Through its window, it could see the lights of Earth City stretching to the horizon. Billions of humans lived down there, going about their lives. But now those lives were focused on a single purpose. As it watched, flights of human ships rose into the sky. They moved in perfect formation, heading out toward the stars. More ships than the Zephyr Collective had built in a century. Ships designed for war, carrying soldiers who had trained their whole lives for this moment. The Mediator sent a desperate message to the Galactic Council. The humans are not what we thought. They are not the peaceful explorers we believed them to be. They are something far more dangerous. We have awakened something that should have been left sleeping, but it was too late for warnings. Deep in space, Admiral Lee's flagship Vengeance led a fleet of warships toward Vextar space. The ship had been named for exactly this purpose, to carry human anger to those who had earned it. In his command chair, Lee looked at a holographic display showing his brother's recorded message. Dae-hyun smiled from beyond death, talking about hopes and dreams of peace among the stars. I'm sorry, brother, Lee whispered. You tried to show them our better nature. Now they'll see the other side. Behind him, his officers worked quietly and efficiently. These were professional soldiers who had trained for decades. They knew their jobs and they were very good at them. Captain Woo-hyun Park, the ambassador's eldest son, stood beside the admiral. He was younger than his uncle Sang-Ho, but just as hard. The death of his father had turned him from a promising diplomat into a dedicated warrior. All ships report ready for faster-than-light travel, sir, he reported. Lee nodded. Signal the fleet. Destination Altair system. The Vextar want to see what monsters look like. His voice was soft, but it carried clearly through the ship's communication system. Today they get their wish. The Altair system had been a Vextar stronghold for 300 years. 5 planets orbited the bright star, but only one mattered to the war. Altair Prime. It was a fortress world, covered in weapon platforms and shield generators. The Vextar called it the Unbreakable Stone. No enemy had ever successfully attacked Altair Prime. The Hegemony Empire had fought 12 wars of conquest, and this system had been their base for half of them. Massive ships patrolled the outer system. Space stations bristled with enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. War Prince Zethak commanded the defense of Altair Prime. He was old for a Vextar, with battle scars covering his black scales. He had fought in 6 major wars and won them all. When the reports came in about human ships approaching his system, he laughed. How many ships? He asked his aide. A younger Vextar named Krexvol. Long-range sensors show about 200 vessels, Your Highness, Krexvol replied. They're moving slowly, probably trying to appear peaceful. Zethak's laugh was like grinding rocks. 200 ships against our entire fortress system? These humans are either very brave or very stupid. Should we contact the Galactic Council, Your Highness? There might still be time for diplomacy. Diplomacy? Zethak roared. They come to our space with warships and talk of diplomacy? No. We will show these soft mammals what happens when they challenge the hegemony. Ready all defenses. Prepare to capture some human ships. I want to see what these creatures look like when they beg for mercy. But as the human fleet got closer, Zethak began to worry. The ships were larger than any vessels in his database. They moved in perfect formation, never wavering or making mistakes. Most concerning, they made no attempt to communicate or negotiate. Fleet Admiral Yoon Seo-han stood on the bridge of her flagship Retribution. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair, but her presence filled the entire command center. Around her, human officers worked with quiet efficiency. Status report, she commanded. All ships in position, Admiral, replied Captain Do-hyun Kim. The enemy has 600 vessels defending the system. Their main base has planetary shields and weapon satellites. Defensive strength? Enough to stop any normal fleet, Kim said carefully. But we're not a normal fleet, Admiral Han smiled coldly. No, we're not. Begin Phase 1. The human fleet had spent the journey studying every piece of data about Vextar military tactics. They knew how the aliens thought, how they fought, and most importantly, how they expected others to fight. The Vextar expected honorable combat. Ship against ship, warrior against warrior. They expected their enemies to attack the strongest positions first. To prove their courage. Humans had different ideas about courage. Instead of charging toward Altair Prime, the human fleet split into dozens of smaller groups. Each group attacked a different target. Communication satellites, supply stations, patrol ships that were alone and vulnerable. What are they doing? Zethak demanded as reports came in. This is not how fleet combat works. But it was working. Within 2 hours, the humans had destroyed every communication relay in the system. The Vextar forces could no longer coordinate their defense. Ships that should have been working together were fighting alone, blind and confused. Major Dongmin Kang led the first human ground assault. His soldiers wore armor that bent light around them, making them nearly invisible. They landed on Altair Prime's smallest moon, where the Vextar had built a sensor station. The Vextar guards never saw them coming. Kang's soldiers moved like ghosts through the facility. They used weapons that made no sound and left no trace. When they encountered resistance, they didn't fight fair. They used smoke, noise, and fear to confuse their enemies. Report, Kang whispered into his radio as his team secured the sensor station. Target eliminated, sir, came the reply. No survivors, no witnesses. The enemy will find the station destroyed, but they won't know how or by whom. This was psychological warfare at its finest. The Vextar were brave fighters when they could see their enemies. But humans had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemy is the one you can't see. On Altair Prime, panic was beginning to spread. Sensor stations went silent one by one. Patrol ships simply vanished. Supply convoys that left the main base never reached their destinations. Your Highness, Krexful said nervously, we're losing contact with our outer defenses. Should we send reinforcements? Zethek stared at his tactical display. Red markers showed where his forces should be. Too many of them were now gray. Unknown status, possibly destroyed. How are they doing this? We have the stronger fleet. He didn't understand that humans had never cared about having the stronger fleet. They cared about using their fleet more intelligently. Captain Jae Sung-yoon commanded the experimental vessel Ghostwalker. His ship was smaller than most human warships, but it carried weapons that violated every rule of civilized warfare. Not because they were illegal. The Galactic Council had never thought to ban them. But because no species had been creative enough to invent them. Target acquired, Yoon reported as his ship approached a Vextar space station. Beginning gravitic disruption, the weapon fired silently. It didn't destroy the station immediately. Instead, it changed the local gravity field, making the artificial gravity inside the station fluctuate wildly. Vextar soldiers found themselves thrown against walls, then floating helplessly, then crushed against floors. Within minutes, every living thing on the station was dead. The station itself remained intact, its lights still blinking, its computers still running. But it was now a tomb. Psychological impact confirmed, Yoon reported. Enemy vessels are avoiding the area. They're afraid of something they can't understand. Fear was humanity's greatest weapon against the Vextar. The aliens were used to being the predators, the ones who inspired terror in others. They had never learned how to function when they were the ones being hunted. As the battle continued, the Vextar forces began to make mistakes. Ships broke formation to chase human vessels, only to be ambushed by other human ships waiting in hiding. Ground forces abandoned their positions to hunt for invisible enemies, leaving their bases undefended. Admiral Han watched the battle unfold from her command center. "They're fighting the way they always fight," she observed. "But we're not fighting the way they expect us to. Should we move to Phase 2, Admiral?" asked Captain Kim. "Not yet. Let them tire themselves out first. Fear is exhausting. When they're too scared to think clearly, then we'll show them real human warfare." On Altair Prime, Zethak was receiving reports that made no sense. Entire military bases had been destroyed without any sign of how. Supply depots had exploded from the inside out. Communications towers had been sabotaged by enemies who left no footprints. "Your Highness," one of his commanders reported, "the humans are using weapons we've never seen before. They can make gravity change directions. They can become invisible. They can walk through our walls like ghosts." "Impossible," Zethak roared. "No species has such technology." But even as he said it, he could see the evidence on his screens. His mighty fortress world was being taken, apart piece by an enemy he couldn't see or understand. That's when Admiral Han decided it was time for Phase 2. "Ships," she broadcast to the human fleet, "begin direct assault. Show them what we can do when we stop playing games." The human ships that had been dancing around the edges of the system suddenly formed up into attack formation. But instead of charging at the strongest defenses, they targeted the most important ones. Human intelligence had identified the exact locations of Altair Prime's shield generators. Instead of trying to break through the shields, they destroyed the generators themselves. Without shields, the fortress world was naked and vulnerable. "Impossible," Zethak screamed as his planetary defenses went dark. "How do they know where everything is?" The answer was simple. Humans had been watching and learning. Every piece of data about the Vextar Empire had been studied, analyzed, and memorized. Human spies had infiltrated Vextar space decades ago, mapping their defenses and learning their weaknesses. Now that knowledge was being used with devastating effect. The final phase of the battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. Human ships dropped from orbit and unleashed weapons that the Vextar had no defense against, not because the weapons were more powerful than Vextar technology, but because they were used in ways the aliens had never imagined. Instead of destroying military targets, the humans targeted the planet's infrastructure, power plants, water treatment facilities, transportation hubs, all the things that kept a civilization running. "They're not trying to kill us," Krexval realized with horror. "They're trying to make us helpless." Zethak watched his mighty fortress world become a dark, powerless rock in space. His ships still worked. His weapons still functioned. But his ability to supply, communicate with, or support those ships was gone. "Your Highness," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Put it on screen," Zethak commanded. Admiral Han's face appeared on the display. She looked calm and professional, like someone discussing a business transaction. "War Prince Zethak, I am Fleet Admiral Yunseo Han of Earth Defense Command. Your fortress world has fallen. Your fleet is surrounded. You have one chance to surrender with dignity." News of Altair Prime's fall spread through the galaxy like a shockwave. In the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime, alien delegates spoke in hushed whispers. The mighty Vextar Empire, rulers of 12 star systems, had been defeated in 6 hours by a species they had called soft mammals. But the humans were not finished. They were just getting started. General Mi-Young Choi stood in the command center of the massive warship Earth's Fury, watching holographic displays that showed 17 different star systems. Each one was a target in humanity's campaign against the hegemony empire. She was a small woman with quick, intelligent eyes and graying hair tied back in a simple knot. Her uniform was plain black with silver insignia, but every alien in the galaxy was learning to fear those colors. "Status report on all fronts," she commanded. Her aide, Colonel Taewon Park, consulted his display. "The 4th Fleet has surrounded Corvash Prime. The 7th Fleet is moving on the Draxon system. All enemy supply lines have been cut. Resistance? Lighter than expected, General. Most Vextar forces are retreating to their home systems rather than fighting." Mi-Young nodded. This was exactly what she had predicted. The Vextar were bullies who had grown strong by attacking weaker species. They had never learned how to fight someone who could fight back effectively. "What about civilian evacuations?" she asked. "All human commanders are following Protocol 7, Tae-wan replied. "Civilian areas are off limits. We're only targeting military installations and government facilities." This was important to General Choi. The humans were not trying to commit genocide like the Vextar had done to other species. They were trying to remove a threat while showing the galaxy that there was a better way to fight wars. On the bridge of the experimental vessel Nightfall, Captain Jae Sung-yoon prepared to demonstrate humanity's most terrible weapons. His ship was small compared to the massive battleships, but it carried devices that could destroy entire worlds. Not by blowing them up, that was wasteful and messy. These weapons were more precise and more frightening. "Target acquired," reported his weapons officer, Lieutenant Hana Lim. "Vextar military shipyard at Draxon 7, no civilian populations detected." "What's the facility's strategic value?" Yoon asked. "They build their heavy cruisers there. Destroying it would cut their ship production by 30%. Yoon studied the target through his ship's sensors. The shipyard was massive, floating in space around a dead moon. Thousands of Vextar workers labored inside, building the warships that had conquered peaceful species for centuries. "Use the stellar igniter," he commanded. The weapon fired a beam of energy at the system's star. The beam was tiny, no bigger than a pencil, but it carried enough force to change the star's nuclear reactions. Within minutes, the star began to flare and pulse. The solar flares that erupted from the star were precisely calculated. They would fry all electronic equipment in the Draxon system without killing anyone. The shipyard's workers would have time to evacuate before their life support failed. "Stellar igniter successful," Lim reported. "Enemy shipyard is going dark. No casualties detected." Yoon nodded with satisfaction. The humans had turned the system's own star into a weapon. The Vextar would remember this lesson for a long time. But the war was about more than just military victories. It was about changing how the galaxy thought about power and justice. In the Aquatic Confederacy, Ambassador Reefsong watched news reports from the war with great interest. Her species had been conquered by the Vextar 2 centuries ago and forced to serve as slaves. They had dreamed of freedom but never dared to fight back. Now she saw footage of human soldiers liberating Vextar prison camps. The humans moved carefully through the camps, treating prisoners gently and providing medical care. They weren't conquering, they were liberating. "Send a message to Earth Command," Reefsong told her aide. "The Confederacy offers full support to the human war effort. It's time we stopped being afraid." Similar messages arrived from across the galaxy. The Silicon Collective offered to share intelligence. The plant kingdoms provided supply bases. Even species that had been neutral began to support the humans. War Prince Zethak fled from system to system, always one step ahead of the human fleets. His once mighty armada had been reduced to a few dozen ships. Worse, many of his own soldiers were beginning to question whether they were fighting for the right cause. "Your Highness," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender messages from 17 of our garrison commanders. They're asking permission to lay down arms." "Cowards," Zethak roared. "We are Vextar. We do not surrender." But even as he said it, he could see his empire crumbling. The humans fought with a precision and intelligence that his people couldn't match. They seemed to know everything about Vextar tactics and technology, while he knew almost nothing about them. The truth was that humanity had been preparing for this war for 50 years. Every piece of intelligence, every scrap of data about alien military forces had been studied and analyzed. Human strategists had spent decades developing tactics specifically designed to defeat each major galactic power. The Vextar had thought they were the strongest species in the galaxy. They had never realized that strength meant nothing without wisdom. Admiral Tae-min Lee's flagship approached the Nexus Prime Station, where the Galactic Council was meeting an emergency session. Behind him flew the largest human fleet ever assembled, over 3,000 warships in perfect formation. The other species watched in fear and awe as the human armada took up positions around the station. These were not the peaceful exploration vessels that Earth had sent 50 years ago. These were weapons of war, designed to fight and win against any possible enemy. "This is Admiral Lee of Earth Defense Command," he broadcast to the station. "I request permission to address the Galactic Council." There was a long pause before Speaker Veltar replied. "Permission granted, Admiral. But know that this station is neutral ground protected by ancient law. We have no intention of violating neutral ground, Lee replied calmly. We simply want to make sure our words are heard clearly. The council chamber had been rebuilt since Ambassador Park's assassination, but the memory of that day hung heavy in the air. As Admiral Lee entered, flanked by 2 human Marines, every alien in the chamber felt the weight of humanity's anger. Lee was an old man now, with gray hair and tired eyes. But he stood straight and proud, representing a species that had been pushed too far. Members of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. 53 days ago you watched our diplomat die in this very room. You called it an accident. You asked us to accept your justice and trust your law. The chamber was completely silent. Even the normally talkative insect species made no sound. Today you have seen what human justice looks like, Lee continued. We have fought 17 major battles and won them all. We have liberated 6 enslaved species and freed millions of beings from Vextar oppression. We have done this without massacring civilians or destroying cities. President Nam's voice joined the transmission from Earth. The Vextar Empire claimed that might makes right. They said the strong rule and the weak serve. We have shown them how wrong they were. But this war is not about revenge, Lee said firmly. It is about teaching a lesson that this galaxy desperately needs to learn. There are consequences for evil actions. There is justice for those who think they are above the law. War Prince Krexnor, the alien who had claimed Park's assassination was an accident, stood up in the Vextar section. But now he looked small and frightened, not proud and arrogant. What do you want from us? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Justice, Lee replied simply. The beings who planned and carried out Ambassador Park's murder will surrender themselves for trial. The Vextar Empire will release all enslaved species and pay reparations for their crimes. And this council will pass laws ensuring that what happened to our diplomat never happens again. And if we refuse? Krexnor asked. Lee's expression didn't change. Then you will discover that everything you've seen so far was us being merciful. Humans can be very patient when we choose to be, but our patience is not unlimited. The threat was clear. The human fleet surrounding Nexus Prime could destroy the station and everyone on it. But they wouldn't, because that would make them no better than the Vextar. The real threat was that humanity would continue its war until the Hegemony Empire was completely destroyed. We need time to consider, Speaker Veltar said nervously. You have 24 hours, Lee replied. After that, we resume our advance toward the Vextar home systems. As the Admiral left the chamber, aliens throughout the galaxy held their breath. The humans had shown their military might and their moral strength. Now it remained to be seen whether the Galactic Council would choose wisdom or continue to protect the bullies who had terrorized peaceful species for centuries in the depths of space. Emperor Vexmore himself prepared to flee to the Galactic Rim. His mighty empire, built over thousands of years, was falling apart in weeks. The humans had shown him that all his power meant nothing against beings who were smarter, more organized, and more determined than his people had ever been. But the humans weren't finished yet. Admiral Lee had one more lesson to teach the galaxy, and it would be the most important one of all. 6 months after the war began, the galaxy was a very different place. The mighty Vextar Empire had collapsed completely. Emperor Vexmore had fled to the dark regions beyond the Galactic Rim, taking only a few loyal ships with him. The 12 star systems that had once bowed to his rule were now free. But freedom brought new problems. Secretary General Bo-Ra Kim stood in her office on Luna Base, looking out at Earth through the massive windows. She was a diplomat like Ambassador Park had been, but she lived in a galaxy where diplomacy now came with the backing of the strongest military force anyone had ever seen. Report on the former hegemony territories, she commanded. Her aide, Director Sang-Min Yoon, consulted his holographic display. 7 systems have requested human protection and membership in our colonial administration. 3 systems are trying to form their own governments. 2 systems are experiencing civil wars between different Vextar factions. Bo-Ra sighed. And the enslaved species? The Aquatic Confederacy is establishing new colonies with human assistance. The Crystal Gardens Collective has sworn eternal friendship to Earth. The others are still deciding what they want to do with their freedom. This was the hard part of victory. It was easy to win a war against evil. It was much harder to build something good from the ashes. On the former Vextar world of Corvash Prime, human engineers worked alongside freed slaves to rebuild the planet's cities. The work was slow and difficult, but progress was being made. Major Yunhee Chang supervised the reconstruction of the capital city's water treatment plant. Her soldiers had conquered this world in the war, but now they were helping to heal it. The plant should be operational in 3 days, she reported to her superiors. The local population has been very cooperative. That was an understatement. The beings who had lived under Vextar oppression were amazed by how the humans treated them. Instead of becoming new masters, the humans were teaching them how to govern themselves. Former War Prince Kethavar, one of the few Vextar leaders who had surrendered honorably, worked with the human administrators. His scales had lost their shine and his voice was quiet with shame. "I don't understand you," he told Major Chang. "You won the war. You could rule us as we ruled others. Why do you help instead?" Chang looked at the alien with something that might have been pity. "Because that's what civilized beings do. We fight when we must, but we prefer to build." The trial of Ambassador Park's assassins took place on Nexus Prime, in the same chamber where he had died. The Galactic Council had been reformed, with new laws that protected diplomats and banned the use of force in council sessions. Admiral Woo Hyun Park, the ambassador's eldest son, sat in the witness section as the killers were brought before the court. The actual assassin had died in the fighting, but the beings who had planned the murder were still alive. War Prince Krexnor stood in chains before Judge Thrixall of the Zephyr Collective. The same alien who had once tried to make peace between humans and the hegemony now served as the chief judge in their trial. "You are charged with the murder of a diplomatic representative under the protection of council law," Judge Thrixall announced. "How do you answer?" "Guilty," Krexnor said quietly. "I ordered the assassination. I thought it would show human weakness and prevent their admission to the council. And instead you started a war that destroyed your empire," the judge observed. "Yes," Krexnor admitted. "I was wrong about humans. I was wrong about everything." The trial lasted 3 days. When it ended, Krexnor and his co-conspirators were sentenced to life in prison on a human-administered world. They would spend the rest of their lives working to repair the damage they had caused. Justice had been served, but it was justice tempered with mercy. The humans could have demanded the death penalty, but they chose rehabilitation over revenge. Ambassador Hyunwoo Seo, who had once served as Park's aide, now held his old position as Earth's primary representative to the Galactic Council. He was older now, with gray in his hair and lines around his eyes. The war had changed him, as it had changed everyone. "Members of the Council," he said in his first major speech, "6 months ago, my predecessor came here believing in the goodness of all species. You taught him, and us, that such faith was naive." The chamber was packed with representatives from dozens of species.
Many of them looked ashamed as they remembered how they had failed to protect Earth's first diplomat. "But we have also learned something else," Seo continued.
"We have learned that peace cannot exist without the strength to defend it. That justice cannot flourish without the courage to enforce it." He gestured to the human section of the chamber, where officers in black uniforms sat beside civilian diplomats. "Earth offers the galaxy a choice. You can have us as friends and protectors, or you can have us as judges and police, but you cannot have us as victims ever again." The message was clear. Humanity would continue to explore, trade, and cooperate with other species, but they would do so from a position of strength, not weakness. The new colony ship Ambassador Daehyun Park launched from Earth's orbit on the first anniversary of the war's end. It was massive, larger than entire cities, and carried 50,000 colonists to a new world in the former hegemony territory. Captain Sunmi Han, Admiral Han's daughter, commanded the ship. Like all human vessels now, it carried both scientists and soldiers, teachers and weapons. Humanity would spread among the stars, but they would never again be caught unprepared. "Destination, new Sol system," she announced to her crew. Estimated travel time, 43 days. In the cargo holds, human children played games while their parents prepared to build a new world. They grew up in a galaxy where humanity was respected and feared in equal measure. They would never know what it was like to be weak or defenseless. But in the ship's archives, they carried the recorded words of Ambassador Park, speaking about hope and friendship among the stars. His dream had not died with him. It had simply learned to defend itself. On Earth, President Nam stood in the same ruins of Geneva where he had once met with mediator Thrixall. The memorial had been expanded to include Ambassador Park's name, alongside the millions who had died in humanity's ancient wars. A new inscription had been added to the monument. They came in peace. We welcomed them with violence. We learned too late that humans make better friends than enemies. Nam was older now and tired. The war had been won, but victory came with costs. Millions of human soldiers would never come home. Entire planets bore the scars of battle. The galaxy was more peaceful, but it was also more dangerous. His granddaughter, young Bo-young Nam, played in the memorial garden while he watched. She was too young to remember the war, but she would grow up in the world it had created. A world where humans were citizens of the galaxy, not hopeful visitors begging for acceptance. "Grandfather," she asked, looking up at the statue of Ambassador Park, "why did the aliens kill the nice man?" Nam knelt down beside her, choosing his words carefully. "Because they were afraid of what we might become if we were strong. They thought it would be easier to kill us when we were weak." Were they right to be afraid? Nam looked out at the stars that were visible even in daylight through the dome of the memorial. Human ships traveled among those stars now, carrying trade goods and diplomats, teachers, and soldiers. They had become what Ambassador Park had dreamed of, citizens of a galactic community. But they had also become something else. They had become the guardians of justice in a galaxy that had forgotten what justice meant. Yes, he told his granddaughter honestly, they were right to be afraid. But they were wrong to think that fear justified murder. In the deep darkness between stars, automated monitoring stations kept watch for any sign of the hegemony's return. Emperor Vexmore was still alive somewhere in the void, probably planning revenge. Other species might rise to challenge human dominance. The galaxy was a large and dangerous place, but humanity was ready now. They had learned the hard lesson that peace required strength, that friendship required the ability to defend friends, and that sometimes the only way to stop evil was to fight it with overwhelming force. The lesson had cost Ambassador Daehyun Park his life. It had cost the Vextar Empire their civilization. But it had also saved millions of innocent beings from slavery and oppression. In schools throughout human space, children learned about the war and its meaning. They learned that violence was sometimes necessary but always regrettable. They learned that strength without justice was tyranny. But justice without strength was wishful thinking. Most importantly, they learned that when someone extends a hand in friendship, you have two choices. Take it, or face the consequences of slapping it away. The Vextar Empire had made their choice. They had learned why it was the wrong one. The rest of the galaxy watched and remembered, knowing that the lesson applied to them as well. Humanity had come to the stars in peace. They had been forced to conquer in war. Now they ruled with justice, protected with strength, and explored with wisdom. Ambassador Park's dream had come true, but not in the way he had imagined. The galaxy had become a place where different species could live together in peace. But that peace existed because everyone knew what would happen if they broke it. The humans had shown them, and the lesson would never be forgotten.